Nella Larsen. Nella, an American novelist from the Negro Awakening, better known as the Harlem Renaissance, was born Nellie Walker in 1891 and died at the age of 72 in 1964. Like the protagonist Helga Crane in Quicksand, one of two novels that Nella Larsen would pen, Nella too was born of mixed heritage. Her father, a mulatto Afro-Caribbean immigrant, and her mother, a white Danish immigrant. She, however, would spend much of her childhood when her parents divorced as the only person of color in her family, with her mother remarried to a white man and with maternal relatives in Denmark. Miss Larsen worked as a head nurse at Tuskegee Institute's hospital in Alabama. She would later marry and divorce Elmer Imus, the second African American to receive a PhD in physics. Although Nella and her husband lived in Harlem as part of the mixed-race elite, she was often alienated from the black middle class. Nevertheless, she participated in Harlem's growing emphasis and pride in African culture, assisting in the preparation of the first noted exhibit of Negro art in 1921. Soon after, she enrolled and graduated from the New York Public Library School at Columbia University, becoming the first black woman to do so. Significant because it opened the way for integration at that prestigious institution. In 1925, while on leave for health reasons, Nella began her first novel, Quicksand. She would soon leave her post as a librarian and join Harlem's literary and arts community, giving Nella entree and prominence as a writer and voice of the Harlem Renaissance. Quicksand depicts the main character's life with an all-white stepfamily, to teaching at a Negro boarding school, to being shunned by her white relatives in Chicago, to trying to find romance and her place in Harlem, until finally landing in the Deep South, married to a preacher, depressed, lonely, overwhelmed by too many children, and still unfulfilled.
I think this, certainly the preference for lighter complected African Americans harkens back to the days of slavery.
There are members of my family that people would be very hard pressed to identify their racial makeup. You wouldn't be able to tell.
Like her author, the central character of Quicksand, Helga Crane, is also of mixed race, who is searching for a community, acceptance, and a people that she can call home. Autobiographically speaking, Helga Crane is the author's alter ego. Join us for our next book discussion. Though the circumstances may be different, it will have a powerful effect on you. It is your story. It is my story. It is a human story. Okay, my BFs, my best friends, Black Foxes. Once again, the Negro Awakening has gifted us with a gift from the 1920s and 30s, Nella Larsen's book, Quicksand. And before we unpack this book, I want you just to take a deep breath, inhaling and exhaling. And I want you to think about your experience in reading this book. And then I'm going to ask you to give me one word. Joyce, just one word, okay?
Now, you know that's going to be hard.
I know, but just one word that reflects your impression, your feelings, your assessment of this book, Quicksand. Who wants to go first?
I will.
Okay.
Spain.
Spain.
Colorism.
Ooh. Joyce.
Repressed sexuality.
That's two words.
That's 2 words.
Pick your choice.
Deborah.
Confusion.
Ah. Janice.
Stuck.
Stuck. Okay, and my word is significant. Why stuck?
At times in her life, she didn't seem like she could get out of her own way. She always ended up in the same place. Quagmire, couldn't move forward. And at the end, that's what she ended up being, stuck.
Stuck. How about you, Valencia? Colorism.
Well, you know, this whole notion of light is good and dark is evil, you know, plays out in the book, but it also plays out in our society. Not as much now as it did back then, or some may argue differently. But it does seem to be an issue that we as Black folks just can't get past. And I find that disheartening.
Is it just us?
Can we not get past
Well,
it,
no.
or can society not get past it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, both.
Okay.
Right. Because of
It's not just
because of the influence that society has on us, and how the larger society has shaped not only how they see us, but how we see us.
Joyce, you wanted to add to that?
Well, I want to talk about the issue that you just raised about not being able to get past colorism. Here was Helga Crane, half white, half Black, not knowing where she stood, but looking like and being a Black woman who never seemed to be able to let loose. She was stuck in the mores of a society that said women behaved a certain way. She was fiercely intelligent. She was, based on what we've read, very, very beautiful, and yet she never seemed to be able to release anything until the end.
Released until the end? I'm not following you with that.
Well, until she goes into the church and wiles out, because that's what she did
Oh,
when she
okay.
got in the church.
I was thinking about the end,
what
was
I'm
when she
talking
was
about.
settled in the Deep South on a farm, overwhelmed
She
with
wiles
children.
out, and suddenly, for the first time, she feels that release, that joy, and that she never felt before.
Okay. Deborah, confusion.
I mean, here's a woman who, in an attempt to define herself, had everybody else defining her. Was she strong enough to really hold on to what she thought she was? Or did she just keep changing? That's
Okay.
a state of confusion.
That's a state of confusion.
Certainly.
Okay. Now, Debbie. Yes.
I want to hear this too.
I tell you, I immediately thought of my experience as an African American woman living in Spain, because Helga went to Europe hoping to escape from the narrow definitions and the narrow, well, really, definitions that the larger society places upon people of color, particularly African Americans. And you're hoping that if you leave this continent and go someplace else where race, quote unquote, will not matter, you can just be all of your human self. But that didn't happen for her. She was seen as an oddity, as exotic. And when I was in Spain as a graduate student, I was seen the same way, as this oddity, this exotic person who represented over 7 million, at least, African Americans in the United States. So immediately I thought, wow, I have had that experience where I think I'm going someplace where I will be judged on the content of my character in lofty terms, and instead I'm some exotic creature.
That's
to me,
interesting
you knew-
because I
you
mean,
knew who you
Spain
were.
shared.
Yeah.
I mean, Spain is part of the
Moors?
globe. Yeah,
One would
it's part of
think.
a global community. It is not one cut off. It is one that has explored. It has been an exploiter of other places. I'm surprised to hear that.
Well, if you go there as a tourist, it's one thing. But if you go there and you live there, as I did, among people who are not all from Madrid or Barcelona, who are from tiny provinces, who have never seen, at least at that time, obviously I'm not talking about today, but it's still largely true in the smaller provinces, then you're going to have a different kind, or I had a different kind of
But you
experience.
didn't go there seeking your identity.
No.
You already knew who you were.
No,
Helga,
but
to
I
me,
was treated that way, as though I was an oddity and an exotic person. I can remember people walking down the street actually stopping me. One man picked me up and spun me around.
Really?
I've seen that happen to you. Very well could happen here, couldn't it?
That's interesting because my grandmother, as an RN in New York City at one of the major hospitals, had the experience of having a German, and don't tell me Germans hadn't seen black folk, because they had, come up to ask her,
If it rubbed
does
off.
it rub off?
Yeah.
So, you know, I guess I'm just flummoxed.
Well, I
by
can
the whole
certainly
notion.
relate to that. I lived in Argentina at one time, and as you know, especially during that period, I think the only people of color in Argentina were Indians, about 2%. And like you, when I was in Argentina, there was a sense of freedom that I experienced because I was not marred with the politics or the woes and worries of being an American living in the United States. Interestingly enough, though, everyone thought I was from Brazil. They were stunned to find out that I was Norte Americana. from North American. And like you, I found myself on TV shows, you know, being this exotic, one of a kind. True, I had a big 10-inch afro,
As did I.
you know, during the time. But
As
yes,
did
for that
I.
very same reason. I remember being in Cordoba and a lot of traffic, and a taxi stopped. And this man got out of the taxi and started yelling, and I turned around, and it was a brown-faced man who was from Nigeria. But he was just so happy to see one of color. But I can certainly see what you're saying. Instead of just being, again, another person.
And that's where I find Helga has some issues. Because I've traveled in Europe, and you are treated differently. People are excited. You create a sensation wherever you go. I didn't find that offensive, nor did I find it breaking of my spirit. But Helga, no matter where that woman went, because she was so repressed, no matter where she went, she could never find that release. No matter what people said to her. I mean, she went to see her aunt and uncle. They put her in all of these clothes, parade her around. She let herself be paraded around like some kind of pet. And then she gets upset about that. She's at a black school, and she's so unhappy with the black folks that no matter where Helga went, Helga had problems because she was suppressed until she went to that church and she
had a cathartic experience.
Had a cathartic experience, and all of a sudden she found her soul.
Well, let's talk about girlfriend Helga Crane, okay? Now, she blamed a lot of her life on being of mixed race heritage, but Joyce, I think that you have really entered the territory about what was really, really troubling her. Do you ever think it's possible to transcend race? Do you ever think that it's possible to, whether you're black or white, does it really matter?
Yes.
What are your thoughts about it?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you where it matters less. When you're on Wall Street, the only color that matters is green. That's right. And if you don't advance the company's agenda, move that business forward and generate revenue, they don't give a hoot what color you are. Out the door you go.
All of you are very accomplished women. You walk in among a lot of different people, among diverse populations, in different areas. You work in different arenas. Have you ever felt like the other?
I think that I have, and I think sometimes it's by choice.
Okay.
You know, because frankly, there's just some folks in my life that I don't want to deal with. Right? But you have to. And
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah, and so I think the answer to your question is yes. But was that by design? Yes. And when it's by design, I don't think that it's a liability. I think it's an asset. When it's not by my design, then I think it's a liability. And so, yeah, because, you know, sometimes I just want to do what I have to do and leave, because I travel in so many different circles that I don't feel the need to create another one. But sometimes what I do takes me into circles that, you know, I have to do what I have to do. And so, yeah, I feel like the other, but that is because that's what Valencia wants and not what, because the environment created that for Valencia.
And what a lesson for others to be able to live in this life, to walk in various circles and feel so self-actualized, experience such a good sense of self-esteem that you don't feel like the other or the only one. I know that I attribute much of that to the way that I was raised.
Absolutely.
You know, to my mother and my father, to the 5 generations of African American women, to always feel confident. Where is she emotionally and physically by the end of the book?
I just felt at the end with all these children and how the church women came to support her. The women in town ended up taking care of her husband for a while and the children. That's right. I just thought it was an amazing turnaround for her, realizing she could not get out of her own way.
And she was stuck.
And she was stuck.
She was stuck, caught in quicksand.
Caught.
Isn't that what happens when you marry on the rebound? Because that's what she did.
But she was in a state, actually, when she met him. Remember, she was actually going through, she was totally disoriented. And she went into a state and into kind of a fit. She was got absorbed in the moment.
Dissatisfied, no matter where she was, regardless of the community, regardless of the people. She was just never satisfied.
How do you wake up in the morning like that?
But a lot of people wake up like that,
That's
who are
true.
just stuck.
And they didn't have the drugs they have today.
Well, that's one solution.
Right,
Today they will
right.
Prozac them or whatever it is they take. So.
Right, that's exactly right.
True.
That's exactly right.
Nor did she have a circle of friends.
Nor did she
Like
have
us.
first.
Okay, first
The
and
original
foremost.
Prozac is your circle of
Exactly.
friends.
That's right.
I
you
like
know.
that. You all in my Prozac.
In this particular story, was Helga unlucky in love, or was she too picky? And that theme of love, being unhappy, unlucky, being too picky, missing love from family, love from a mother, a father, pick it up any way you would like to. Think about that theme of love. What do you think?
I think she was definitely searching for love. Remember, this was a woman whose father had left her mother who was Danish, married a white man. They didn't accept her. They rejected her. So she was always looking for someone to lift her up and make her feel better. And in a lot of ways, she was never able to find that. And I don't think it was that she was too picky. She just hated herself so much that she could never, ever accept that somebody could really love her. And we see a lot of that in women today.
I was just thinking the same thing, that often when we think about the concept of love or the theme about love, you know, it's in the context of relationships with other people, with men or with women, friends, family. But I think that the concept of the relationship you have with yourself and how much you love
Your first love.
your first love is
Yes.
yourself, right? And so, and that just manifests in everything that we do. So whether or not she was picky or unlucky has to do with the fact that she didn't love herself. So, please.
To your point,
Yeah.
I am so loved because it always starts with me.
Yeah.
And I couldn't love anyone unless I loved me. And because of the way I feel with that, anything and everything that I do is done with the base of love. And by that I mean whatever goes around comes around. And to me it was very important, and my mother and my father taught me that. My mother and my father used to tell me when I was a child that the bottom of my shoes never got dirty. And they never got dirty because everybody picked me up.
I like that.
I just never got a chance to wear out my shoes.
I love that.
And you see my aunt, I'm on her hip. I went from one aunt to the other on their hips. And so with that in me, in my DNA, I could never, ever respond to anyone that I cared about without feeling love. And that was my first feeling.
And I think for a woman, they say the first love you have is your father. Right. And I know that was very, very true for me. I'm definitely the quintessential daddy's girl.
Oh, yeah.
And when she had no father in her life, only an uncle in Denmark, right? She had no father in her life. She was always hungry, always, what's the word the kids use now? She was thirsty all the time.
Well, I
And
wonder
the
about her
uncle, it was
relationship with
conditional.
with her dad. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Even with her uncle, it was conditional because once, she didn't marry the way they thought she could and bring fortune to their family, et cetera, et cetera. They had a problem with her. She
And
was
that's
no
where the
longer
element-
welcome.
that was
It's
the
like
element
God
of
bless the
racism.
child who has his own. You know?
And that was the element of racism within the family.
Well, is
I
that-
I would certainly like to know what her relationship with her biological dad was, because once the mother and he divorced, she was the only person of color in her family. Mom remarried. She and her white husband had a white child.
Yes.
Even though Helga tried to associate with her relatives in Chicago. If you remember, that uncle's wife was so racist.
Oh my God.
Although he did take care of her at the very end by giving her money.
But he gave her
so she didn't have that
$5,000
foundation,
to go to
that
Denmark.
foundation of
Right.
love.
Yeah.
Exactly.
To leave
She
town.
didn't have that
To leave
foundation of
town.
love, which is so critical to one's sense of self-esteem, one's upbringing, one's identity.
Well, and not just women. I've told this story before. I was on the foster review board. And one of the things I remember very distinctly, coming home and you'd read these case stories, and the children were not loved. They were thrown away very often. And you'd sit and listen to these cases, and I remember coming home and telling my husband, there's going to be a time when these same children have aged out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
then
we
what? Gonna pay that price.
Have a
That's
price.
right.
We will pay a
Yeah.
price.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because you're
Yeah.
talking about young men and women who do not know what love is.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because through my sorority, I actually work at the juvenile. I work with young men at the juvenile detention center,
And you do good.
and you know, to work with these young men who have been thrown away, who do not have father figures, you know, the repercussions for that lack in their life is them ending up where they are. But the hope is that when we go in and we work with these young men, we don't know what they're in there for. We
You
don't
don't
know
even
how.
ask.
Don't
It's
it?
not
It's
relevant.
not,
We
it's
can't
not
ask.
important.
The way
Not
we set up
important.
the program, we cannot ask.
That's important.
So we walk in there and we say to them, we don't know what you've done, we don't know how long you're going to be here, and we don't care. And we work with them on a monthly basis, and we bring outside speakers in to talk to these young men, and you can see in their faces, in their eyes, the way they respectfully interact with us, that they realize that they have made mistakes, but they also realize that they are not defined by
By that
those
mistake, yeah.
mistakes.
And that's the hope.
That's the
Exactly.
hope.
The
That's
hope
the
that you're
hope.
giving them,
That's
that
the
of
hope.
unconditional
Absolutely.
love.
See it.
But we have to turn key
Absolutely.
our experiences and reach down.
And set the
Because
example.
but for the grace of God go I.
There you go.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so we must turn key that
On
with
any
others.
given day, I
On
say
any
that.
given day.
That is our
Any
charge.
given day.
It is our
Exactly. That is our
charge.
charge.
That is our
Mission.
charge.
Our mission. Absolutely. Yes. That's our mission.